My office mates are a bit of practical jokers, that bunch, because not content with me reviewing a Nissan Patrol, they've also asked me to review something even bigger. And it's this one, the all-new Chevrolet Tahoe. Now, fortunately for them, I do quite like driving cars that are rather inappropriately large, and I'm genuinely curious how this thing fares in our roads, because this thing is made in America for American roads and American consumers. So, how well does that sort of translate when it comes to us in the Philippines? And I'm also genuinely curious if it makes a good alternative to everyone's favorite full-size SUV, the Toyota Land Cruiser. Now, in terms of design, what we have here is actually the pre-facelift model, because the facelifted version was just released in America. Now, of course, the signature split grille is present. It has been that way with the Tahoe and the Suburban since, well, God knows when. And the headlights have sort of a more modular design. Back then, you had those two split headlights back in the day, and then they sort of made it into one shape. And now it's sort of this amusing contour right here. Now, this being the Z71 package, the front bumper is different because it is the off-road oriented model. Now, another thing about the Z71 model is it actually has smaller rims compared to the high country model because, well, you want a fatter sidewall when you're going off-road. And speaking of which, it comes equipped with all-terrain tires. Now, the rest of the body, well, it is evolutionary from Tahoes of past. Tahoes have never really changed their shape over the years. They just grew exponentially to a point that this thing measures about 5.4 meters from bumper to bumper. Compared to, say, a Toyota Land Cruiser or a Nissan Patrol, this is even bigger and wider and taller than that. Now, we're going to start with the obvious here, and that's the space of the Tahoe. I mean, it is a massive vehicle. It's 5 and a bit meters long, and it dwarfs just about every SUV out there on local roads today. Legroom here at the front, obviously fantastic. There's this wide center console because if it was any thinner, you're gonna lose a lot of stuff between the seats and the console. And at the same time, even if you move the seat forwards or back, there's just a whole lot of space here, and you're never gonna complain about ever feeling tight in a Tahoe. For the materials, it's a bit of a mixed bag if I'm gonna be honest, because okay, it feels premium enough, but if you're going to consider the price tag, which we'll get to later, some of the materials do fall a little bit short. And there's the buttons that sort of wibble and wobble a little bit when you do interact with them. But, if you're going to compare it with other full-size SUVs in its segment, it's not bad, but I do wish some materials did feel a little bit more premium. The rest of the interior is generally pleasant to look at and to sort of feel and to touch. It's a clean sheet design, it's not polarizing, and there's somewhat a feeling of premiumness inside of this SUV. Now, where the Tahoe has you covered is in the cubby space department. Here in the middle, of course, you have your wireless charger, which is actually pretty deep. It's actually longer than my handspan. And you have two large cup holders to go along with it. And just below that, you also have these pockets down here as sort of a secondary storage bin. But the main highlight here would be the center storage box. And when I say it's a box, it really is a box, because what can fit in here? Now, in this box, you also have this tray that you can fit various things in. And if you remove that, you can put a laptop, a lunchbox even, and you can actually still sort of close it. Of course, you're gonna need a little bit of Tetris, but the fact that these things fit inside is insane. There you go. Now, you're probably curious about the infotainment system. So it's Chevrolet's MyLink system, and we're just gonna turn on the ignition here, just to show you what it's like. So the infotainment screen, the main menu, it's pretty basic, but at the same time, it is fairly responsive. Like you can also control your climate from here. Loading times are actually decent. And if you go to the other submenus, you go to the settings, the animations are fluid, the response times are quick, and really I have not much to complain about it. It's almost idiot proof, to be honest. And that's the thing about these American infotainment systems. They're generally easier to use compared to like the European ones, and some Japanese units even. Simple, straightforward, just the way you want it. And I have to laud Chevy for, just keeping things as simple as possible in the Tahoe. Now, if you think the front area is spacious already as it is, wait till you sit in the second row because there's just stacks of legroom and headroom here. And you'll probably be surprised to see that there is a flat floor to go along with it. So this is a true 3-across SUV. So much so that you can actually put a child seat here in the center because there are ISOFIX mounts, not just in the outboard seats, but even here in the middle. So you're going to see these ISOFIX mounts here, of course. Comes with a Bose sound system. And I'm going to say that, it's a solid sound system, of course. But when it comes to tuning it, I still think Mazda's the best among like the mainstream manufacturers. But here in the Tahoe, it's actually pretty solid, considering it has to fill up this much space for that surround sound system. Now here, you have your controls for your climate control, effectively making this a tri-zone climate control system. There are also seat heaters, just like in the front. Sadly, no seat cooling, but this is made in the US. It is actually made in Texas, to be specific, their Arlington facility over in the States. So like the front, there are USB ports, but unlike here, you only get a pair of USB-Cs. I do like this though. There is a 220-volt socket down below. And actually before this shoot, I was working on my laptop, needed a bit of a charge, and I was able to publish a couple of stories before we actually began. So that thing is always handy, having that 220-volt socket there. Now, normally we say the third row isn't suited for adults when it comes to SUVs, no matter the size, but that's not the case at all with the Chevrolet Tahoe. Same goes for the Chevrolet Suburban. Now, this is a true 3-row SUV because you can actually fit adults here as well. I still have about this much legroom, and that's with this seat pushed all the way back and the backrest just reclined enough to be comfortable for whoever's seated in the second row. Now, of course, the Tahoe is so wide that you can actually fit 3 people at the back here. So it's not just a 7-seater, it's actually an 8-seater. Now, when it comes to equipment back here, you have a USB port, and there's also one on the other side. You have a mini cup holder and a mini cubby hole here. Also, if let's say you're seated back here and whoever is seated in front forgot to, let's say, fold the seat forward, there is an easy access button. So all you have to do is press it once and it folds down the seat squab, and press it again for a much easier exit. Now, before I mention anything about the cargo space, I'm going to have to mention that Americans measure their cargo areas a little bit differently. Normally, what we would do, or at least in Asia, what we do is we measure it from floor to the topmost part of the rear seat. In America, they measure from floor all the way to the ceiling. You can easily fit a month's worth of groceries. It's more than, say, a subcompact crossover back here. But if you do need extra space, you can fold the third row and the second row via a button over here at the back. So with the third row folded down, how much space are we talking about? Well, it's about 2,040 liters. And if you fold the second row via more buttons back here, you're looking at over 3,400 liters of cargo space in the Tahoe. So, do you really need a pickup truck? Well, this is a rather expensive alternative, but look at all the space back there. There's one more highlight I want to show in the Tahoe, and it's not the power tailgate, because just about everything these days has a power tailgate. No, you can open the back 2 ways in the Tahoe. Obviously through this one, and if you press a button down here, it opens up the glass hatch. Now that's for sort of lighter items you can just chuck in there, or if you do happen to have an automotive publication and you need a camera car, this is a very effective solution to that. So right now we're in the natural element of the Chevrolet Tahoe, which is the expressway. And of course, as you'd expect from a big American land yacht, it performs this duty admirably. Ride is smooth, there's a hint of firmness, and mainly because it's on off-road suspension, it does have air suspension, while the magnetic ride dampers would also iron out the bumps in a way that it keeps the ride level and whatnot. Now when it comes to, let's say, rougher roads or like humps, potholes, deep potholes, and really badly designed speed bumps, the Tahoe just basically shrugs it off. And it's not just because of its sheer size, but it's also because of its weight. Give or take, it's nearly 6,000 pounds, or about 2.5 tons. And just for reference, this is even heavier than a Toyota Land Cruiser and a Nissan Patrol. With that 5.3-liter V8 under the hood, it makes about 335 horsepower and a good slug of torque. Now, because it's heavy, it's not exactly the fastest SUV in the world. 0 to 100 takes about the region of 7 seconds. But that's still quick enough for a lot of people. I mean, there are a lot of V8 full-size SUVs out there that do the same task at about the same amount of time. But the difference is, the Tahoe, because it has variable cylinder management, it shuts off half the banks of the cylinders when you're cruising, like what we're doing now, to make it a little bit more efficient. However, there are times that you do catch it out. Like, for example, I want to overtake, and yeah, it takes a little bit of time, but when most of the time, it actually responds pretty quickly. And let's be real, nothing beats the sound of a naturally aspirated V8. Okay, so this is a big, gargantuan SUV, so corner carving isn't exactly the top of its priority list. That being said, I mean, it's got independent suspension on all 4 wheels. And, for something that weighs over 2.5 tons, it's not bad at all. Of course, some of you are probably going to be curious about its fuel consumption. Okay, here's a bit of a disclaimer. If you're in the market for one of these, or any V8 gas-powered SUV, fuel consumption is probably not the biggest of your priorities. So it's got a 5.3-liter V8. Okay, it does try to save a little bit of fuel because of active cylinder management, which, if I'm going to be honest, barely does anything, because when it's in 4-cylinder mode, it's still carrying that much weight. So the difference is almost negligible. No? But regardless, if you're curious about the results of fuel consumption, around the city, well, you're going to do about 3 kilometers per liter. If it's like really bad traffic, it's, somewhere in that region, 2.8, 2.9, 3.1, 3.2 kilometers per liter, which is par for the course. But what really surprised me is its fuel consumption around, in mixed conditions. So city driving, highway driving, and, a bit of provincial driving as well. So at an average speed of about 20 kilometers per hour, according to the trip meter at least, it still returned about 5 to 6 kilometers per liter. And for something this heavy with a V8 engine and a 5.3 liter, that's not bad at all. I was expecting worse. I was expecting like similar to city, like 3 to 4. It wouldn't make much of a difference because of its engine size. But no, it does well actually when it comes to mixed conditions. So all things considered, fuel economy is actually decent for something that weighs as much as a small planet or a comet. But I did mention earlier that the Tahoe's natural element is the highway or the expressway. So let's say you're cruising along at 100 kilometers per hour, just chilling basically. So what's the best result you can get out of it? Okay, so maybe the active cylinder management does work to some extent because, I'm not doing any hypermiling or anything, just standard cruising with a fair bit of overtaking. And it can still display about 9 to 11 kilometers per liter. That's a solid result, and considering it's also on all-terrain tires, which don't really add anything when it comes to efficiency. So, it's saddling a lot of weight. The tires aren't the eco tires of any sort. So, yeah, I mean, it's not every day you get to call a 5.3 liter V8 efficient, but for what it is, It's actually good. So what do we think of the Chevy Tahoe? Is it hugely inappropriate for the Philippines? Well, okay, think of it this way. What is the dream SUV of a lot of Filipinos? It's a Toyota Land Cruiser. It's a full-size SUV. And for those saying that, oh, it's too big for the country, well, tell that to the thousands of Land Cruiser owners in this country. Yes, it's bigger than the Toyota, but that's no different from people who buy this segment of SUV. They want it because they want a large SUV. Let people buy what they want to buy. However, there is one thing we want to tackle about the Tahoe, and that's the price. It's about 7.7 million pesos, almost 7.8 million pesos. But we're going to discuss that a little later on and dive first with its pros and cons. Now, the pros definitely is the ride and the performance. And I'm going to mention even the fuel economy, because for something this big, I was expecting like 2.5 kilometers per liter all day, every day. But drive it in mixed conditions, you're still, it's still a 5.3 liter V8, but considering how much power it has and how much weight it has to carry, it's not bad at all for this sort of vehicle. Now, of course, another plus of this car is the versatility and the space. Now, aside from the large cargo area, I mean, you got stacks of legroom, stacks of headroom, and basically the loads of cubby storage spaces in there. I mean, it's second to none. It's hugely, hugely versatile, if a little overkill on size, according to some people. And then there's the way it drives, because it's not too cumbersome, if I'm going to be honest. I mean, yes, it is as wide as it can be and as long as it can be. Well, it's smaller compared to a Suburban, but that's besides the point. It's not intimidating. Initially, maybe, but to be honest, because it's light on its feet, relatively, you're not going to be scared to maneuver this SUV around. Now, for the cons, I'm going to be honest, the stability control on the Tahoe is a little bit too sensitive. I mean, if there's a corner that you see that, you could take it at a good amount of speed and the stability control just kicks in and it just wants to reel it in and just basically wants to be as safe as possible. But at the same time, the chassis itself is good. And I think the chassis can handle corners so much more if the stability control doesn't intervene as often as it did. Now, the other one is the cabin materials. The build is a little bit inconsistent. I showed you one of the plastic trims in there, and really it's not fitting to the price, which is the third con. I mean, yes, there are discounts, but how long is that going to last? It's eventually going to go back to that 7.7, 7.8 SRP at some point. And that's sort of the thing that bugs me the most about the Tahoe, because I do like it. I mean, there are merits to this SUV. The thing is, it's priced like a luxury vehicle. And if you know the background of the Tahoe, this is a blue-collar SUV. This is what a lot of American families drive, particularly around the southern region. This is like normal transportation for them. And why it costs this much in the country? Well, you could blame taxes on that and import duties and etc. But 7.7, 7.8 M is a little bit hard to swallow when in fact you can get a Toyota Land Cruiser for about 2 million less, if you can get it for sticker, that is. But there's also the Nissan Patrol, and there's an all-new version coming in down the line. And I really just can't wrap my head around the price, which is a shame because I really did quite enjoy my time with the Tahoe. Now, if the new distributor can find a way to adjust the pricing and give it a more reasonable price tag, then I would say the Tahoe is a winner. But there is a counterpoint to that, because as pointed out by my friend earlier, why are there more Escalades than Tahoes in the Philippines? Well, the answer to that is simple. Brand prestige. Chevrolet just simply doesn't have the same cachet in the Philippines as Cadillac does. And really, it's a shame because, again, great SUV, one of the best, if not possibly the best SUV in the full-size segment. I mean, the Patrol is pretty old already. The Land Cruiser, well, we'll probably never have a chance to ever drive one because you guys keep buying it. And, the Expedition has been discontinued. And honestly, I can say that this is a better SUV than the discontinued Expedition. It's not stopping me from loving it, though, despite the price. So the score, then? Well, if it wasn't for that SRP, I would have given it a perfect score. But in this case, I'm going to dare and give it a 9 out of 10.